3 ingredients necessary for life. And it turns out that all organisms either need to synthesize or ingest those ingredients in order to live. We're going to start out with the most basic of these ingredients for life, and that is the carbohydrate. You've no doubt heard of them. You may, in fact, be avoiding them like the plague. But the fact is that nothing and no one can avoid carbohydrates because they are the source of all energy that we have available to us. Carbohydrates are made up of sugars, and the simplest of them are called monosaccharides. Mono for one, saccharides for the actual root of the word sugar. The star of the show here is glucose, because it's truly fundamental, by which I mean like #1 on the global food chain, because it comes from the sun. All biological energy is originally captured from the sun by plants as glucose through photosynthesis. And every cell that needs energy uses glucose to get that energy through a process called respiration. In addition to glucose, there are other monosaccharides like fructose, which has the same molecular formula, C6H12O6, but arranged differently. These subtle chemical differences do matter. Fructose, for example, is significantly sweeter than glucose. It's also processed by our bodies in different ways. And then there are disaccharides, which, like the name says, are just 2 monosaccharides put together. And the most famous of these is sucrose, which is simply a glucose molecule and a fructose molecule joined by a covalent bond. Mono and disaccharides are pretty much little niblets of energy that are really easy for our bodies to process. But when these carbohydrates start to form into longer and longer chains, their function and their roles change as well. Instead of being sources for instant energy, they become storehouses of energy or structural compounds. These are polysaccharides. Instead of being just 2 or 3 monosaccharides put together, polysaccharides can contain thousands of simple sugar units. And because they're so big and burly, they're great for building with. In plants, cellulose is the most common structural compound. It's just a bunch of glucose molecules bound together, and it is the most common organic compound on the planet. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to digest. Cows can do it, but humans certainly cannot, which is why you don't enjoy eating grass. Polysaccharides are also really good for storing energy, and not just structurally, but just as an energy store. And that's where we get bread. Now, really interesting thing here, bread made up of starch, the most simple of which is called amylose. Amylose and cellulose look almost exactly identical, but one is grass and the other is bread. Like chemistry. Plants store glucose in the form of starch, and it comes in lots and lots of different forms, from roots and tubers to the sweet flesh of fruits to the starchy seeds of the wheat plant that end up being milled into flour. Ground up grain is the main ingredient in the bread, of course, and most of the calories, or the energy content, comes from carbohydrates. When I eat this, and I'm going to eat the hell out of it, I'm going to be eating all of the chemical energy that this wheat plant got from the sun in order to feed its next generation of seeds that we then stole for our own use. All for me. Now, we as human beings can't grow fruits or tubers, so we have to store our energy in a couple of different ways. The way that we tend to store carbohydrate energy is in glycogen, which is very similar to amylose or starch, but has more branches and is more complicated. It's basically made up of the glucose that we have left over after we eat, and it sits in our muscles really ready to use, and it's also stored in our livers. It's generally a pretty short-term store. If we don't eat for like a day, pretty much all of our glycogen gets depleted. But over the longer term, the way that we store our energy is through fat.